Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining from wherever you may be. It is a great privilege for me to be able to share some of our research on workplace well-being and the links to firm performance, and I'm so grateful to the team at Populo for setting up the Populo Engage conference and for asking me to address all of you, distinguished group, to talk about our research a little bit. My name is Jan-Emmanuel De Neve, and I'm a professor of economics and behavioral science at the University of Oxford. I will now also share my slides and add that in addition to being a professor of economics, I also run the Wellbeing Research Centre at the university, which is now a group of about 15 scholars focused on the empirical science of well-being with a specific focus on workplace. And so that is obviously most relevant to you today. I also run the World Happiness Report as one of the editors, and our center serves as the hub for the World Happiness Report, of which you may have heard, as it ranks all the populations around the world and provides cutting-edge insights around what makes for good lives and happy societies, and was in the news quite recently. And then finally, I'm also a co-founder of the World Wellbeing Movement, which brings together visionary corporates that really want to put their shoulders behind well-being metrics in both business and public policy. So I'm sorry for that lengthy introduction, but please do ask and don't hesitate reaching out if you want any more information about our research and the impact activities that I'm engaged with. And again, thank you to Populo for the opportunity to speak and address this special crowd on the topic of employee well-being and the business impact that has. So think of this very much as the business imperative of focusing in on the employee experience in the workplace. And we'll define that quite a bit more as I start. But I do want to point out from the beginning, one of the reasons why I'm so excited to speak to you is because this has to do with the world's largest study on this front, which I've now had the privilege of running for the past 4 years in collaboration with Indeed, the job search engine, where we've crowdsourced over 20 million, to be precise, surveys from gauging the worker experience. And so that's the data that we'll be using. So you'll hear more about that in a second. So what I'll do over the space of the next 30 minutes, and then allowing some time for Q&A, is to first of all tell you a bit about how we define and measure employee workplace experience or well-being, how we measure this at a scale never seen before. The second thing I want to do then is dig into, so this may give a sense for how we feel, but what drives this? What helps explain why we feel the way we do? And there's some interesting and surprising results there that I'm keen to share with you. And then turn our attention to, does any of this matter? Does the workplace experience, your employees, how they feel at work, does that matter at all for productivity, recruitment, retention? And then if you put these three pathways together, is there sort of an organizational performance element to this as well? So is there business performance linked to employee well-being, and why? And does it run through productivity, recruitment, and retention? And you obviously see where I'm heading with this. I'm going to make a strong case, I hope, and probably the world's strongest case to date for precisely that point, that there is a very strong business case for organizational performance, or a business case for investing in well-being to drive organizational performance. And then going to finish on a high, it's just to apply some of this to actual financial stock market performance contingent on the employee workplace experience. So a lot of exciting things I'm going to be sharing with you in the next half hour. So without further ado, let me get going. The first thing is, how do we define and measure workplace experience? Well, we do this by asking questions, because after all, there's only one way of finding out whether people experience the workplace in a positive way, and that's by asking them. But in the science, there's different ways of asking and defining workplace well-being. And as it turns out, there's ways that have to do more with the experiential element of work, which is, are you feeling happy? In other words, are you experiencing positive emotions? Or are you experiencing negative emotions, which is on questions around stress, catch and pick up the negative affect. But then in the literature, we do also think more about not just the experience of work, but also how you evaluate work. So when you think about work rather than experiencing it, how do you feel satisfied? Are you content with the job, which is not an experiential, but an evaluative measure? And then finally, more drawn on the philosophy of Aristotle, really. Do you feel that your work has a sense of purpose? So this is more what is called an eudaimonic measure for workplace well-being. So combining the experiential, the evaluative, and the eudaimonic ones, there's essentially 4 questions that we ask of people to have a holistic view on workplace experience, and that's happiness, stress, or the absence thereof, sense of purpose, and job satisfaction. Importantly, these are our KPIs, either separately or put together in an index. You can put these 4 together. But it's important to distinguish those outcome measures from the input measures. In other words, what I'm measuring with happiness, stress, purpose, and satisfaction is how you feel at work or about your work, not why you feel the way you do. And we'll get into these drivers. And so very important from the get-go, I want to emphasize the importance of splitting out conceptually the inputs versus the outputs, the outcome versus the drivers, or the means to the end, or the end versus the means, so however you want to call it. But conceptually, I really want people in the space working of human resources or well-being to really make that distinction. I spend my days talking about that with lots of people in the field like yourself. So how do we measure this at a scale never seen before? Well, you need extraordinary industry partners, and I found those in the shape of Indeed, which is, by the way, a sister company to Glassdoor, which are them both owned by the same holding company called Recruit Holdings of Japan, which is listed on the Japan Stock Exchange. Long story short, and the reason why I raise this is because I think there's only Indeed and Glassdoor in the past, but Indeed sort of taking it to the next level, are able, have the reach to speak with people in jobs, to really capture the experience of work at a scale never seen before across all the markets. And this is really important to you, I think, employers and HR managers, in that they also are the places that potential recruits will look at to get a sense for, one, the jobs available in your organization, but also as an aggregator for information around the jobs and the quality of the jobs. So in the future, I really see an opportunity here for, when you advertise jobs, it's not just going to be, this is jobs X, Y, Z with a certain salary package attached to it, but it would also say, and people in this job or people at this organization experience work really positively. And that's starting thanks to Glassdoor and Indeed, and I think it's going to be something that's going to revolutionize the industry. So workplace experience is going to be, I think, as important as potentially the salary attached to a job, and it will drive job search behavior. And I'll show you some evidence, some early evidence on that front. So this is how we go about this. Thanks to Indeed, we've developed this survey that we're now crowdsourcing around the world. And as we're speaking, in the space of the 30 minutes that we're here together, we'll have crowdsourced thousands of responses from around the world. Most of the United States, UK, Canada, but also all other major markets that you might be interested in. And interestingly, these data are made public. So some of you work for large organizations, and if you were to go to your to your company profile on Indeed, just like you will have been familiar with it on Glassdoor, you will actually see the average response to these outcome items summarized in the work well-being score for you. So if I look at my own employer, the University of Oxford, I see that there's 54 responses, and that the average aggregate response for happiness, stress-free, purpose, and satisfaction is 78, which puts us in the top 20% of the top 20 of the average response across organizations. So this is quite nice. Now, you may not be impressed with the 54 responses that staff at the University of Oxford have, but the major corporates, especially in the United States, we would have tens of thousands. So if you work for Walmart or McDonald's or Costco or you name it, well, there will be thousands and thousands of responses that have come in. So it's really exciting. And when we look at the organization level, we find huge differences in how people rate the employee or the work experience at their organization. So I think what you're seeing on the screen is essentially the distribution of company well-being or organizational well-being split between the 4 outcome items. So you can either put them together into one, or here you see they're split out. And what a difference there is between organizations. So if you look just say at the happiness question, well, there's lots of organizations that, like, the average is around 3 out of 5, being asked on a scale from 1 to 5. But then there's organizations where the average happiness is, the experience really is very positive, and over 4. And then there's a bunch of organizations where the workplace experience is very poor, and they have an average rating or response coming back from their staff that puts it at less than a 2. And so there's huge variation between organizations. And we pick this up within industries, between regions, and even within the large companies, we can pick up differences between organizations. So I think it's, for us academics, it's exciting to see that there's such variation. But I think for you as practitioners, the big lesson here is it is not predetermined. So it means that well-being can be changed. So what we find is that even in tough industries and tough regions, even in companies not particularly known for being the greatest places to work for, you'll find examples. You'll find lots of variation. So it shows that it is possible to generate and create an environment where people rate their workplace experience as high. And that, I think, is exciting news. So there's no deterministic element here. You will find good examples in any industry and any region, and even within any company. And so that's something, I think, aspirational that we should all aim for. It is possible to generate good workplace well-being experiences. So that moves on to topic number 2. What are the drivers of workplace well-being? So we have now a good sense of how people feel, the actual experience of work, but what explains the differences and the variation between companies. And so in our survey, we don't just do job satisfaction, happiness, stress, and purpose. We also ask them about other things, such as, do you feel like you're achieving something? Are you being appreciated? Do you feel like you have a sense of belonging? Are you being compensated fairly? Do you feel like you have the flexibility you need? Do you trust people at your workplace, etc., etc., etc.? So we've got about 10 of those. And if we were together in person, I would ask you, hey, let's pause a second and think through what you think is the key driver for your workplace well-being, the experience you're having at work, or for the people in your team or unit, and sort of put a ranking out there about what you think is most important in driving workplace well-being for you or your organization. And so when we've actually done that with about 5,000 individuals, and what we find is that what people think drives well-being tends to revolve around about compensation, which obviously suits the neoclassical economists really well, because in the olden days, economics would propose that work simply is an exchange of money for your time. So it's very transactional, and the only thing you care about as a result is obviously the money, the compensation for not having leisure and having to work instead. So this fits the old economics mantra really well. But we also have flexibility, inclusion, achievement, appreciation, and so on and so forth, is what people rank order as the most important thing driving workplace well-being. So this might also underpin your thinking. It might align with what you were thinking is the most important thing for workplace well-being. It actually underpins a lot of the HR actions that people undertake to try and improve. It underpins a lot what the CEO and the CFO tend to do in companies. But, and this is the eureka moment that we had and have seen also in other data sets, when you actually look what seems to explain variation in workplace well-being outcome measures, compensation, flexibility are important. There's no question about it, especially at the bottom of the pay scale. Compensation will matter a great deal for how people feel at work. But people underestimate some of the more social elements of the workplace experience. So I think the big insight coming through of the driver analyses, and again, this is replicated in smaller studies and other data sets that we have access to, is a sense of belonging, trusting your colleagues and your line manager. And we'll get into what we mean with belonging in a second, but I don't want to diminish anything else, because all the things you're seeing on the screen matter for workplace well-being. But this driver analysis allows us to get a sense for the relative importance of some of these drivers relative to others. And so I think a key finding that I hope you'll take away from this presentation is that the social elements, culture, belonging, trust, all that kind of comes together, we'll dig into it in a second, are a lot more important than people think. And we'll dig into and potential interventions to improve on that front. Now, if you didn't put a sense of belonging at the very top of your list, you wouldn't be alone. Only 6% of managers actually do rate a sense of belonging as their expected #1 driver of workplace well-being. And so it is vastly underrated, I think, as a reason or what helps explain workplace well-being. What do we mean? So if we focus a little bit into this murky concept of a sense of belonging, then really when we dig into this in focus groups, we ask people, so what do you mean? What makes you feel like you belong or have a sense of belonging? The things that then come up are feeling like my company cares about me as a person, having friends at work. And by the way, if I can zoom in a little bit on the having friends at work, some of you will be using the Gallup Q12 engagement survey, which is great and gives you a good sense for engagement at work. One of the Q12 items is actually something that people tend to laugh at, which is, do you have a best friend at work? And it's always a question that gets people smiling, so like really, best friend at work? Well, guess what? I'm an advisor to the Gallup organization, and the people at Gallup have made it very clear to me that amongst the Q12, the single item that has the most predictive power of workplace well-being is precisely, and you will have guessed it, the friends question, having a best friend at work. And so the more you let this sink in, the more you'll realize, yes, this is what gets people out of bed and excited to get to work. This is what retains people at work. This is what keeps people engaged and motivated at work, is the fact that they feel like they can bring their whole person, their friends at work, and they understand the impact they're having on other people and teams in the organization. So it's this social capital that you're building in the organization. And that can be improved by improving communications, which I know Populo as a technology obviously enables. And there's a number of ways that we can work on this. But this is a lot more important than people tend to expect. And they underestimate the importance of trying to generate a sense of belonging. Now, all of this, does it matter? Does it matter for company performance? Does it matter for individual productivity, recruitment, and retention decisions? And I think the answer here is yes. And I'm very pleased to be able to say that I'm about to share with you some of the best evidence on this front with you. And so let me turn to productivity first, which as a hard-headed economist, we obviously look at first. And I'm very pleased to say that in the context of British Telecom, BT, the largest private sector employer in the United Kingdom, we were able to show this for the first time in the field with causal inference, which is a big deal in academia, because all of you will have intuitively felt that if you feel better, you might be performing better. And so the happy worker, more productive worker thesis has been around for a long time, but to actually show it causally in the field is a lot easier said than done. So it took us 7 years, but we published it finally last year. It was peer-reviewed as the first causal field evidence. Long story short, what we did is we surveyed all the call center employees every week on a Thursday afternoon around 4 p.m. And asked them the experience question. How happy did you feel this week? So they were able to answer this on a scale from 1 to 5. And then we linked this to very granular levels of performance. And if you aggregate it, this is still correlational, what you're seeing, for example, is that well-being at the call centers, and there's about 14 or 15 call centers around the UK, actually a few more, and they range from Middlesbrough to Warrington to Doncaster to Canterbury. And what you're seeing is the average level of employee happiness or workplace experience from one week to another correlates very strongly with the average weekly customer satisfaction that's achieved or generated by these particular call centers. So you find that the Doncaster one or the Warrington one, the employee happiness is higher. And guess what? Customer satisfaction coming back from calls placed to those call centers is higher than the ones that say Leicester, Lincoln, or Middlesbrough. So this is exciting news, and it sort of hints at something powerful at play. But really, the most powerful results came when we looked at the individual. And what we saw there is that changes from one week to another about how you feel really, really link to even something as hard as sales. And so what we find here, what I'm showing you, is if you move people from very happy sorry, apologies, from very unhappy to unhappy, from unhappy to neutral, from neutral to happy, and from happy to very happy, you're moving the dial on sales every step of the way. So if you were to move somebody from very unhappy to very happy 1 week to another, we'd expect there to be about 12%, 13% increase in weekly sales. So it's highly significant, economically speaking, especially obviously as you aggregate it over time and across call centers. One thing that I don't always have the time to dig into, but I want to do here with you is, this is just weekly sales across the board. But when we looked at the type of sales, we found that the level, how you felt, the experience at work, your workplace well-being, was more important when the types of sales or actions you were to take were more complex and required more social emotional intelligence. So sales that had to do with, say, retaining a disgruntled customer and upselling them, for example, or selling complex packages of broadband and telephone at the same time, how you felt at that moment or that week was a lot more impactful on those types of more complex sales. So there, the effect was a lot larger than the 12, 13% I'm showing you on the screen, which is just the average effect. On the other hand, sales that were just order taking, for which you didn't need emotional or social intelligence, there the effect of how you felt was less than 12 or 13%. So in sum, what I'm trying to convey here is that in most of your organizations, the types of tasks that people do are very complex and require social and emotional intelligence. And in fact, with ChatGPT, AI, and much else coming along, the types of tasks that we'll be left to do as individual workers will be mostly those that require social and emotional intelligence. All else, like order taking, we'll probably be able to leave to the machines. And yet, it's precisely those more complex tasks requiring social and emotional intelligence that need us to be happy, to be well performing. So the results that were obviously widely reported on in the media, the results you're seeing on the screen, are very much a lower bound of the effect of well-being on performance. So let me move on from that to the second pathway to performance, as I call it, which is that, does well-being matter for recruitment? And it most certainly does. My former student, now colleague and friend, George Ward, as part of his MIT PhD thesis, leveraged the Indeed platform to randomize being exposed to workplace well-being statistics versus not from the perspective of job seekers. So what he did is really rather extraordinary. For his own institution, MIT, he would randomize, think of an A/B test, the old-fashioned just company profile, MIT, about the company, and then the new company profile, which included information about workplace experience, so how people working at MIT felt as they were working there. And so you'll still recognize the purpose, the happiness score, etc. Job seekers exposed to the workplace well-being scores, in other words, the experience of work from the workers themselves at those places, change your job search behavior. These were the results. So companies that had high workplace well-being scores saw percentages increase in job applications to them. And on the flip side, companies that were low work well-being scores, where workers rated the experience low and that was made visible to the job seeker, well, these job seekers screened out to some extent that particular company and were less likely to apply to those positions at the company. So this is very important for anybody in the HR and talent recruitment spaces, because the fact that these data around workplace well-being and experience are made publicly visible, job seekers start responding to this. And the third channel that I want to share with you is obviously retention. And so if we look at another site that you'll be familiar with, in this case Glassdoor, and this is one of many research pieces I can share with you on the well-being and retention piece. This is going to be the most obvious one of all, which is that if people rate the quality of their workplace high, so if they like the experience of work in your workplace, then they're way less likely to start applying to go elsewhere. In other words, retention is a lot higher where workplace well-being is high. And so in the case here of Glassdoor, what we've been able to show is that employees who rate their workplace experience as 2 stars out of 5, well, they're twice as likely to begin an application to a new job on Glassdoor in this case, as compared to those who left 5 stars. So this is indicative, of course, of the retention channel. So as you will have seen, we're starting to build out a real holistic view of workplace experience, and how to measure it properly, the KPIs, the outcomes. How is the experience of work for people? Then we also get a sense, if you look to the left of this diagram, what are the drivers of workplace well-being? So we're starting to get a good handle on what are the most important drivers of how people ultimately feel at work, versus what they think might drive it. And then we'll see and hopefully get to discuss in the Q&A what are some of the interventions that might actually move the needle on these drivers of workplace well-being. But then if you move to the right in the diagram, you'll see that beyond just measuring and defining and driving workplace well-being, we also start showing that it matters a great deal. So what I've called or coined the pathways to performance are raising productivity, recruiting talent, retaining talent, and we didn't have a chance to talk about this, but there's also, I think, a new pathway brewing, which is it raises investment potential for organization, or at least for organizations, or at least reduces their cost of capital if you can improve workplace well-being, especially if that feeds into ESG metrics around social impact that make you more attractive to investors and pension funds and banks to work with. So the big final question that I want to then address is, well, do these pathways to performance, do they lead to general firm performance improvements, all things considered? And so let me turn to that now. And that is the question, well, is there a general business case for well-being? And I'm going to apply financial and stock market performance to this question. So I'm going to leverage the extraordinary, indeed, crowdsourced data set. And because we have data for most of the, especially in the United States, most of the listed companies, we have a good sense for how people experience the workplace. And what I'll do is I'm going to link those crowdsourced surveys, average responses to how people feel at work in those places, with the financial performance and ultimately the stock market performance of these listed companies. And we're focused on the US at the moment. So what you're seeing here is really rather exciting. It's the on the horizontal axis is the average workplace well-being of the companies, and we have about 1,600 companies that are listed in the United States, either on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. And what I'm showing you is obviously not all 1,600. I've bunched them into deciles. So every dot is either the bottom decile or the top decile or some decile in between. And what you're seeing here again is, first and foremost, that there's a lot of variation in company well-being. So the bottom decile is below 2.5 out of 5, whereas the top decile, the average workplace experience is 3.5. And then on the vertical axis, you're seeing hard financial metrics for these companies: firm value, return on assets, gross profitability. And what you're seeing is that there's a very strong correlation between how the company feels, how the workers feel at these companies, and how well the company does on these systematized financial hard metrics. Now, this is correlational, but we also look at these company well-being scores, for example, in a number of longitudinal ways. So we looked, for example, at company well-being pre-COVID to see whether that could help explain variation in financial metrics post-COVID. And there too, we found a very strong correlation. So we're moving away from just correlational evidence to starting to move in the direction of longitudinal evidence and a certain predictive power to workplace well-being. And that's what you're seeing on the screen now, where we look at pre-COVID well-being scores explaining or being correlated with post-COVID or post the onset of COVID financials. And then finally, let me turn to another study around the predictive nature of workplace well-being, where I'm going to use this to essentially look at the stock market. So here what you're seeing is just your industry benchmarks, so the NASDAQ 100, the S&P 500, and Dow Jones. And we're looking at this January 1st, 2021. And you'll remember there was a bull run in 2021 where all the stock indices did really well. Then there was sort of a bear market in 2022 where all the stocks did very poorly. And then from 23 onwards, it was sort of volatile. We're in the process of updating this, but at the moment, the analysis runs till about April 2023. Now, let's see, our workplace well-being stats, could they, the companies with high well-being, would they outperform the stock market? And the answer is yes. So what you're seeing here is just the top 100 companies. So remember, we have about 1,600 companies in the US that we have good, robust data for in terms of workplace well-being. And amongst those 1,600, we take the top 100 based off the previous year data. So in this case, we use the 2020 data from the crowdsourced surveys to compile a portfolio of the top 100 companies. And then we let that run in 2021. So we start the portfolio in 2021 based off the 2020 data. And what you see is that the workplace well-being data allows for outperforming the stock market. So there's a predictive power to have the workplace experience in driving ultimately company performance, even on the stock market. And then in 22, you see that the 2021 data helps us pick the more resilient companies in 2022, and in 23, we're outperforming again. So this is really exciting. I want to leave you on something that I think is really important, which is that everything I've just said, I've shared with you, probably comes across quite intuitive, even though you may not have seen the numbers or the robustness of the science behind this as strongly. But while this is very intuitive to most people, in fact, 87% of leaders report that prioritizing employee well-being could give their organization a competitive advantage. When you dig deeper and ask these same people whether they've actually prioritized it in their organizations, only 35% have done so. And that, I think, is a call for action and shows that we still have a lot of work to do. So I'm going to leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for your time and the attention. And again, thank you to Populo for the great opportunity to present our work. I'm now going to ask Populo's editorial director, Tim Vaughan, to join me in conversation around and looking forward to the questions he has to ask and the conversation that we'll have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. That was absolutely fascinating. So much to process there. But I think I'll start straight with on your last slide there. If I was a CEO in the 87% who believed that I could get a competitive advantage by investing in well-being, but I wasn't making it a strategic priority, what steps would I need to take to move the dial there? And what companies are leading the charge, are raising the bar in employee well-being?
Thank you, Tim. You're asking the big complex question right from the start. But I think it's essentially 3 big steps that company leaders need to do and need to take if they really want to move the needle and be serious about workplace well-being and actually prioritize it, which remains a minority of leaders, unfortunately, as we pointed out. The first thing is to measure it and measure it properly. And that means not just your annual or biannual big staff engagement survey. It means something that you measure it, really the experience of work in the workplace, and you do it relatively regularly, not on a weekly basis like we did at BT for the study, but maybe something at the monthly basis, something that's more like a pulse survey, where you use the communication technologies these days to have a light touch, a much more rapid fire pulse of the organization and how people experience work. So I think that measurement piece, the definition of measurement piece, needs to be much improved. At the moment, most companies do this once a year, and it's a dreaded long survey. And by the time you pick up on an actual trend, the problem has gone. or the problem has festered. I mean, the people behind the problem have gone, so you can no longer act on it, or the problem has festered to an extent that it's too late to act upon. So you're way behind the curve if you're not leveraging the new technologies, the common technologies that will enable you to be actually getting the pulse of the organization and act upon it. And technology allows you to do that these days. So there's no more excuses for the big organizations out there. But that's just step one, is measurement and getting your definitions right and knowing what you're measuring. The second step, of course, is then making sense of the data and understanding what's going on. And that's sort of the driver's piece, and getting a real sense of what is actually driving the work experience in your organization. And as we've shown, that's very different. That might be different from what people think it is. So if you have HR leaders, their gut might tell them, oh, it's compensation, or CFOs or CEOs will mostly think about comp or flexibility. But as it turns out, if you run proper driver analysis, it might be other things that be driving workplace experience at your company. And it might be different things by type of worker, or by gender, or by race, or location. And so we need to make good sense of the data and have proper understanding of what is actually relatively most important in driving the workplace experience for some workers. But then the data and the understanding are just two essential steps that aren't by themselves going to move the needle in workplace well-being. So step 3 then becomes evidence-based interventions, building off your tailored and customized sort of understanding of workplace well-being in your organization. So then the third step is the most difficult one, because then the leadership of the organization needs to properly think about, well, what interventions actually work to move the needle on what we've discovered is actually most important in an organization, or is amongst the most important things. And so what I found is that individual, typically HR leaders, or even CEOs, they're sort of at a loss. They don't quite know what interventions actually work. And so at our research institute at Oxford, we banged on the drum quite a bit about making sure that people think beyond just the wellness interventions, which are right, but you have to do more if you actually want to move the needle. And so I'm pleased to share we've done the world's largest sort of systematic review now of all the evidence out there of what actually works in terms of driving workplace well-being, split by driver, flexibility, compensation, sense of belonging, and made that available as the work well-being playbook through our work well-being movement.
And who's leading the charge of this? Who is actually, what companies out there are getting it right in terms of employee well-being and belonging?
Yeah, well, thank you, Tim. A lot of companies are getting it right. So as was made clear in the survey, about a third, or just shy of a third, of companies do take this very seriously. And I got the great privilege of working with Unilever and HSBC, for example, who work on this front. And their global chiefs on health and well-being really take this very seriously, both the measuring piece, the understanding piece, and then trying to drive the change within. And it's not just limited to sort of interventions that are nice to have, but they do understand the need to go deeper. What's nice is, for example, Diana Han, who's the Chief Health and Wellbeing Officer for Unilever, she has the ear of the CEO of Unilever, and she's pushing for more structural interventions that really put health and well-being central. An example here where I know they're taking this very seriously is that they're even going beyond just moving the needle or trying to move the needle, but then also using this, having evidence, having these interventions rolled out as a randomized control trials. So there's a scientific piece as well. So for example, with Diana Han and her team, we're rolling out a psychological safety intervention in Mexico for the ice cream suppliers and vendors. And so, and they're not just rolling out interesting and important interventions that have shown to be relevant and moving the needle. They're even bringing in the academics to try and also assess and evaluate the impact it's having within their organization, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I think, is an example. You can tell that Unilever and HSBC, who also has this global head of well-being called Andrew Gibbons, they are taking it very seriously, both the measurement piece, the understanding piece, and the interventions piece. And then go a step beyond that, which is then bring in the academics to also be able to add back into the evidence base what they're doing and what they're finding. And that, frankly, is extraordinary. And I'm hoping that it will inspire people on this call too.
I think one of the many standout slides that you showed there was the anomaly between the perception of the drivers employee well-being and the reality, and seeing belonging coming to the top well ahead of others that people would have thought. What are the interventions to drive belonging?
Thank you for asking.
In a hybrid, hybrid world, fully remote, all that debate about in-office, hybrid, fully remote.
Yeah, so I couldn't, thank you for raising this, Tim. I couldn't emphasize the importance of belonging more, especially as we move towards a sort of a hybrid world of work. It's pretty clear, I think, people looking into hybrid work or potentially even fully remote, that it's that sense of belonging that's very much at stake in many instances. So if you go fully remote, then you bet that sense of belonging will get undermined over time if you never get to bond with your actual colleagues. Because don't forget, that sense of belonging, when we dug a bit deeper, it's about feeling like the company cares about you as a person, that you have friends at work, that you know the impact you're having on others, and so you know where your place is in the organization. That's that sense of belonging. If you're working fully remote, good luck trying to generate that sense of belonging. And so, but at the same time, those hybrid approaches, if done well, where you make sure that the teams come together at the same time around the same topics and the same tasks that are synchronous in nature, where you have to work together, make sure to sort of a coordinated form of hybrid working, then you can maintain a sense of belonging while enabling also the flexibility of working from home. So I think what I'm personally seeing is that the hybrid approach, if done in a coordinated, smart way, can be the best of both worlds, where we enable a sense of belonging, yet also enabling more flexibility. And if we get that right, then we'll score both on the productivity front and the well-being front for our employees. But going back to your original question, right? So what interventions actually do help on the belonging piece is, one, obviously getting the working from home revolution right. But I think technically, actual interventions have more to do with improving worker voice, getting people's voice more into decision making. And I feel very strongly that new technologies like Populo and other, these communication platforms, enable us now to do much better on both informing people and giving, in a dynamic sense, their voices into the mix as well. And I think we really need to leverage that a lot to generate a sense of belonging. It was a lot more difficult in the past, pre these kind of technologies, but now we have no excuse. Technology is there. Other things that can really help on the belonging piece is making sure that workers of all strides feel represented in the senior decision making. And finally, much more on a micro level, proper mentorship programs that generate a sense of belonging, so people feel as they're being onboarded into an organization, that they feel like they're being cared for and have a mentor-mentee relationship. And so I've seen programs that are sort of tick-the-box mentorship things versus programs that are really taking this seriously, where mentors really become mentors to people over time and introduce them into the organization, so that they feel like they quickly belong to it. So I think there's different sort of approaches here. And again, I want to point to what we call the Work Wellbeing Playbook from the World Wellbeing Movement, where the actual articles and research pieces that dig into this are made available for free.
Thank you, Jan. Unfortunately, we're out of time. That's been too fast. It was fantastic to talk to you, and thanks again for taking part in this session.
Thank you, Tim, and good luck to all of you, and stay in touch.